I'm thrilled to have a bit of time with you today, Paul. So we've known each other for about 3.5 years, I think, when we first came to you as cabinet member for housing at the council, and we talked about this notion of the Bristol Housing Festival. And early doors, huge credit to you. You saw some of its potential and opportunity, and we've kind of had some real ups and downs over the last 3.5 years. You've now, obviously, in your new position, you've left the cabinet, and now you've taken up this new post as Elim. So today, I thought it'd be great to just do some reflection on you, on some of those achievements and the things that happen are happening within Bristol, to look back at the sort of the culture of Bristol, but also to look forward with you about what the things that you see and anticipate are opportunities for Bristol. So can you start, Paul, because you've got this extraordinary varied background that actually spans probably a lot longer in terms of council engagement than people realise. Can you just give us a quick snapshot, if you like, of your potted history of engagement in housing and council affairs and where you are now?
Crikey.
Yeah, I know. In 2 minutes.
Where do you start? Well, I grew up in the council flat in Hartcliffe in South Bristol. And so because it was on a council estate, it seemed like the council ran everything. You know, they were the thing. And so I had that sort of interest from then. When I was a teenager, I got involved in something called the South Bristol Youth Council through my youth club. And we campaigned on youth homelessness because at that time there were young people sleeping in vehicles in the car park of the youth centre. And so that's 1980 is when I first got involved. So that's 40 years active involvement in housing. I went away to university. I came back and actually was working as a youth worker and got back involved in the issues around youth homelessness and setting up something that was then called South Bristol Youth Housing Association, which was to provide housing for young people. It's now part of 1625 independent people. And also at that time, sort of fairly similar time, I both became a member of the council. I was first elected to the council in 1988 and a member of the council's housing committee, which I've pushed very hard to be on because I felt that Hartcliffe as an area didn't have a voice there. But I also got my first job in housing in that time, working for a housing training organisation. So I've worked in housing for over 30 years, and in fact last year I got my professional accreditation as a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Housing. And I've worked for various housing bodies and for the National Housing Federation. I've worked for a couple of housing associations. And I was aware that the housing association I worked for, Astor Group, had made a decision to stop trying to develop in Bristol. And it had done that because it said Bristol was just far too difficult to work with. And I looked at what was going on in Bristol in terms of homelessness and the housing situation. And I thought maybe I could come back again, stand for the council again. I came off the council in 1999, stand for the council again, work with Marvin on a housing strategy to actually try and deal with the crisis within the city. And that's what happened. In 2016, I was elected to represent the centre of the city. I'd worked up on the housing strategy. Marvin appointed me as his cabinet member for housing, and the rest, as we say, is history.
Well, except, and we'll talk a bit more about that, except of course you've completed your stint as that cabinet lead, and you've just taken on this new role. Can you just tell us what you're now doing? Because you're still in the housing world very much.
I am, and you know, I love the housing world, and I know a lot of the people within it, but I also know the huge difference. You know, good quality housing that's genuinely affordable to people in high quality environments is so important to people. And so I never intended to stay on the council for a long time. I felt to a certain extent I had this mission to come in and try and change the whole culture of the way housing was done by the council, and to get that whole sector moving again, which I think I've done. And so then, what was the next challenge? Well, there are very few housing associations based in Bristol, and when people get the job of leading them, they tend to stay there a long time. So when one becomes available, it's like now or never.
Yeah.
So the job at Elim came up, which is a fairly small housing association, is just over 800 homes. I applied and have been appointed as the chief executive role. I'm starting in October.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that, and I think we'll probably come back to that and your sort of future hopes and aspirations. It would be wrong not to just take a bit of time for you to reflect on your tenure as cabinet lead for housing in the city, and I know there's a lot of things that you're rightly very proud of that you would have achieved in partnership as that cabinet. Can you know, and I can name them, but I'd rather you did. But do you want to just take us?
I'd like somebody to tell me what they were.
Well, you throw some of them out, but I'm conscious you came in at a time where the mayor had run very much on a ticket for housing. It was very much about sort of this target 2,800 affordable, against a backdrop and a legacy where there wasn't really a lot of affordable social housing moving up the city. And I know that is your passion. That's the thing that's very much driven your energy. So can you and what people won't always appreciate, of course, is how complex and nuanced and difficult it is to get that kind of machinery moving to deliver. So do you want to just talk about some of those sort of key, I suppose, from an infrastructure perspective that you delivered through the council, and then what you're proud about for achieving, what you hope that will go on to deliver for the city in the future?
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is people often want when they say what have you achieved, they expect you to reel off a list of stuff, and I can do that. In fact, I've just written a sort of 3-page document for the mayor on what have we achieved over the last 4 years. So quite a lot of bullet points there. But for me, the important thing is changing the culture. Yeah. Without changing the culture, you can't do anything. And when we came in as an administration, I think we had a culture which was, there's loads of problems out there, things are really terrible, but we can't do anything about it. And also a housing service which was completely siloed and was basically formed around managing decline. Yeah. And I would say a very demoralised service. So I think that the most important change is to move from we can't do anything to we can do anything. In a sense. And if you look at say the ZPODs project, no other local authority in the country has taken on a project like that. No. Both in terms of the built form, but also in terms of the way that we've changed the lettings process to make that work. And so that culture change is so critical. That was about bringing housing back into the centre to become solution focused. How do we do stuff rather than giving a list of excuses why things can't be done, and also building. Another important thing was building a corporate team responsible for getting housing built within the city. Believe it or not, when we took over, there was nobody whose job was just to get housing built. The two big priority projects when we came in was building the arena and finishing the Metro bus, and housing that probably wasn't even in third place. And that there was nobody who was holding housing as an issue. And so setting up a multidisciplinary team, bringing in planners, project managers, surveyors, the affordable housing team, enabling team, into one unit whose job was to drive housing delivery was absolutely crucial. Yeah. But what we said very early on is we want to be innovative. So one of the first approaches that we had when we came in was from the community-led housing sector. Yeah. In fact, they approached us before we were elected, and they said, the council says all the right things, that it wants community-led housing, but everything it does blocks us being able to deliver everything. We don't want the warm words. We've had all those. What we want is you to make sure stuff gets done. And in some ways, to get the council out of our face, to get out of the way, try to stop. And, the council did like to micromanage everything, including itself, but also external partners, which is why a lot of housing associations were walking out of the city. So, working with that enormous body of enthusiasm that exists in the community-led housing sector and trying to unleash it rather than to control it, I think was really important in terms of that culture change as well. And sort of fed in well to then the approach of, why don't we do this Bristol Housing Festival? Because it seemed to me it fitted very neatly, potentially, with the community-led housing approach.
Again, what's interesting to me in that is there's that concept of culture is often about why are we here, what's our strategic ambitions, and you've been very clear, because when we're talking about housing and the role of the council, of course, one of your big focuses has been on, I suppose, what we might talk about market failure, not just housing, but that niche in the market of affordable housing, which sometimes and often the market unfortunately struggles to deliver, and the council can do that. So when
there's more than that in a sense, because the market parts of the market don't want to deliver it at all. So try and find every way to avoid it.
And so that's my next question. First, can you just define for us what you specifically as BCC, when we refer to affordable housing, is a very clear interpretation. And then secondly, can we talk a little bit about those mechanisms that you've, as the council, helped to really push on with the HRA and Gorham?
So part of that also saying we own most of the land. Now, I guess the other thing about, the changing culture was we should be the developer.
Well, this is one of the key.
So the first thing, the first sort of decision that I made, in fact, it was even before I was the cabinet member, but not officially appointed through the council's processes. So I was probably being a bit presumptuous. There was a prospectus that had been produced in the October before we were elected in May, with 80 hectares of land on it, land that was going to go out to the market for sale. And I withdrew that and said, we're not selling land. We've got a commitment to set up our own housing company, and we will develop it ourselves. Now, that land portfolio included Hengrove Park, which we're taking forward through a joint venture, Bonington Walk, which Legal in General are building modular housing on, which half of which will come back as council housing. Airport Road, which Bocklock are building housing on, all of the affordable, which will come back as council housing. Ashton Rise, which was then called Alderman Moor, which the council is building out itself. So bringing that land back under our control.
Just to give us a number there, you're talking about over several thousand houses in that.
If you take just those four sites, they add up 350, 1,700, 1,900 homes.
Okay, so a couple of thousand homes.
So if we just let those sell, we were lost completely control. The planning system has very little, and I'll come back to your other question in a minute. The planning system has very little control over what's built. To be honest, but if you own the land, you have that ultimate control. And it comes back to this. You said, what are the mechanisms you can use? Well, I would say one of the mechanisms is leadership. But I think visually, the way I thought about it is levers. And I've got a PowerPoint slide that I've used lots and lots of times, a picture of a railway lever box with 3 levers on it. And those 3 levers, as far as I'm concerned, are land, which I've already mentioned, money, which we can talk about if you like, and then planning. And in that order, that's how strong they are. If you haven't got any land, it's really, really difficult. I mean, with the money, you could buy some land, but it's quite expensive. They're not making it anymore. So it's difficult to get hold of if you haven't already got it. And then the planning powers. But the thing about those is individually you can use each of them, but the real power and authority of the council comes from using those levers together. and making them work. So for instance, if you take planning, the rules around the viability, where a developer is allowed to get a certain amount of profit before it has to provide any affordable housing, is to say, okay, let's get as much affordable housing as we can through the planning system, but then use a grant fund to top up to get more. And that's actually been one of our most successful mechanisms.
You've got this new grant system, isn't it?
Yeah, so we inherited a grant fund of £3 million. We boosted that up to 57 million. And that, so far, from the money that we've allocated, we've actually built and finished, or Housing Association built and finished 300 homes. And there's a lot more in the pipeline from that. So it was about using the planning and the finance powers together. And of course, where we're the landowner, we're not necessarily using money, but we're working the land along with planning, and we've got planners in our delivery team to make sure that we're not just building units, we're not building boxes to try and get as many as we absolutely can on site, but we're trying to build exemplars. So we're trying to build quality environments which include housing. Some instances will include community facilities, parks, play areas, whole range of other things.
You're going right back to what you were talking about, the 1990s.
Absolutely. We're trying to reimagine that vision in the 2020s, with obviously the climate emergency sort of looming very, very high over what we're doing, and using the fact that we are the planning authority and we're the landowner to actually make that happen. And some of that we're doing through council housing and development of council housing. Some of that we're doing through our housing company, Gorham Homes. Some of that we'll be doing in other ways.
So you've got these various levers there, haven't you? So when you say council housing, that's where there's a housing revenue account that sits within the council.
So I've got levers and I've got tools. And my tools, and you're one of my tools, or you were one of my tools.
Don't know how I feel about it. You call him a tool? Okay,
You're a spanner.
I've been called worse.
So we've got the housing. The housing department, we call it the housing revenue account, just to make it sound really, really boring and so nobody understands what we're talking about. But it's the traditional council housing department. It can borrow money, it has access to land, so it can build. Then we've got Gorham Homes, which is our housing company, which sits financially and legally in a different part of the council, has access to different land and different money. So it means that we can play with the land and the money that we've got to use it in either of those mechanisms. We've got the Bristol Housing Festival acting sort of as a broker in many respects, in terms of bringing in sort of new players to the market and looking at new approaches. And some of that will be through the HRA, some of it will be through Gorham, some of it will be through housing associations. I'm sure they wouldn't like me to call them a tool. Some of that through community-led housing. And so what we've got is these whole range of mechanisms which we can use or support. I mean, some of them are using us to achieve our ambitions.
And I presume when you look back at your time, picking up again this theme of leadership, which you've talked about, that culture of innovation, where a lot of what you're talking about is actual structural strategic innovation within the council. I would presume that there's been obviously and understandably a lot of discourse around the council not hitting its targets, but I presume you look back and say, actually, I'm incredibly proud that there is now a pipeline of affordable housing that started at a pretty low base to now not only delivering, but you've got a healthy pipeline coming forward, but you've got all these different tools, to use your expression, of delivery that's now up and running.
So obviously I'm going to agree with what you've said, but if you look back, we went a few years ago, delivered 120 affordable homes. People are now upset that this year we're only going to produce 500, which is a 4-fold increase, right? And our delivery has been delayed by a whole range of things, COVID being probably the most severe. But we've come across all sorts of issues around procurement, around problems with sites, the Environment Agency, heritage.
Housing's complex,
planning.
Right?
Everything's slower than I would like. But but you know, I know it's not very British to talk about being proud of things.
Yeah.
But
go on.
But personally, I am proud
good.
that what I've established, as you say, is a whole range of mechanisms which are delivering. There's loads of stuff being built at the moment. Okay, it might not be finished in this year, but it will be finished next year and the year after. And we're seeing a huge burgeoning of affordable housing delivery within the city. We're seeing a resurgence of council housing of the like that we haven't seen for 40 years. So yeah, I am really proud of that. And also, you know, nobody will ever realise what a struggle it's been, for instance, to set up Gorham Homes. So Gorham Homes is our housing company. All the parties on the council had been committed to setting up a housing company. It was something that had been agreed by a scrutiny commission before I was even elected that we should do it. And I thought it would take us a year. It took us 2.5 years. And you know, we had to go through huge amounts of due diligence, huge amounts of financial justification, huge amounts of legal processes and what-ifery. And
then re-reviews of those decisions.
And how do we make sure that we close all the stable doors before the horse bolts? A lot of nervousness because Bristol Energy hadn't been performing as well as people had hoped, and you know, general nervousness about setting up a new company. So it was really difficult. Actually, you know, I had thought 12 months. Actually, you know, more like 30.
But interestingly, timing-wise,
but it's there now.
It's there, and
it's there now.
Entering into contract on its first site before you.
Well, it's signed its first contract with Bovis. It was Galliford Try when they'd done the deal. They've got another site which they're working on now. We've got a list of about 5 or 6 sites that we've offered to them, that their board has accepted, but there hasn't been a formal transfer of engagements of any kind. That we're also looking at other opportunities for them, but basically they're now there. There's something that we can deploy for the right development schemes. And you know, Theresa May lifted the borrowing cap on council housing, which has now allowed us to build a pipeline of over 1,000, over 1,200 council homes within the city, and some of that, as you know, through the relationships brokered by the Housing Festival and through the energy created through the Housing Festival being created. And I always think it's really interesting is that when you do something in Bristol, as well as being a radical place, is a cynical place, right? And so you do something in Bristol that everywhere in the country say, God, look at what they're doing in Bristol. And the people in Bristol say, oh no, not another load of and you know, what about this and what about that? And it's like, you know, it's that thing about, you know, a prophet not being recognised in their own country. It does feel a bit like that in Bristol, that the cynicism is huge, but the enthusiasm for Bristol is also enormous. And so we are attracting in investment. And for me, one of the really exciting things, if you take both the Bocklock site and the Legal and General site, is yes, that's private companies coming in and doing the building, but the housing, which will be, you know, tenure blind in effect, a lot of it is coming back to be council housing. So we're using this mechanism and this enthusiasm and excitement about Bristol to generate a new generation of council housing within the city.
And interestingly, going back to one of your original points, that there's a leadership position there because those schemes will be some of the first schemes of their type in the UK. And I think that's a really interesting piece to me, back to that innovation, that there's sometimes that courage, isn't there, to go first.
Well, one of the things, you know, I wanted, and this is a probably about my ego as much as about anything else, is that I wanted Bristol to be the place people look to when they're saying, how do we solve the housing crisis in this country? And, you know, I think there are two areas particularly that exemplify that. One is the Housing Festival and the way in which we've been open to a whole range of new ideas and thought. You know, if you look at the Launchpad project, which is and the Z-Pods, which are both about providing housing, and both about providing housing to some of those most distant from the housing system, but also they're projects, experiments in creating community.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's really important. And a lot of people don't see that. They see, oh, there's a nice picture of something we can put on a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah. But what they don't realise is the work that's going on to create communities.
Yeah. That's the people story behind those, isn't it?
Yeah. Is the house, what we're trying to do for the Housing Festival, and what we're trying to do with community-led housing, and the sort of amazing work of things like We Can Make in South Bristol, the project, the very ambitious project for the South Mead Development Trust in the north of the city, the amazing local, I don't know what's the best way to describe it, but the local drive that exists in Lawrence Western around the projects that they're doing there, and others too. I mean, I could spend ages listing them all, but that huge enthusiasm for communities taking control of housing, and for me, I've run charities. I've also worked in housing associations. When I've been in housing associations, and I'm about to run one, when I've been in housing associations, people have often talked about, we haven't got much money to do this, that and the other, right? Come and run a charity, right? I ran a charity, the Furniture Reuse Network, a national charity, which was, when I took it over, was just massively dependent on grant funding, which meant it rose and fall with whatever was the issue of the year with the National Lottery Fund and also with trust funds. It really was hand to mouth. So, you know, it wasn't just a question about setting a budget. I had to manage the cash flow to make sure that at the end of each month there was enough money in the bank to pay everybody's wages. And if that meant not spending money on anything else, that's what we did to cover the costs. Whereas when I worked for housing associations, what I saw was this enormous flow of money coming in each month as the rent came in. And organisations that had developed massive capacity. I mean, I first got involved in housing in a meaningful way in 1988. Housing associations were quite small beer then on the whole. And a lot of them just rose on government funding, you know, not necessarily because of their own abilities. But what those organisations were able to do is they were able to build all sorts of capabilities within them. Finance, HR, IT, as well as the, you know, repairing the homes, collecting the rent, dealing with the issues of tenants, but actually building organisations with huge amounts of capacity. And one of the things for me is, how could we put that sort of building of capacity in the hands of local communities by then being able to capture that rental income, yes, to manage the homes, but also to give them secure funding so that they weren't dependent on the vagaries of either council grants or lottery grants or anything else, that they actually had a sustainable income. And with the Furniture Reuse Network, built a commercial arm which provided a sustainable income. So in a sense, part of the vision around community-led housing is not about a group of hippies who build their own home and live as a little community. It's nice, you know. I got no problem with that if that's what I do. But actually, particularly in places like South Mead and Knoll West and Lawrence Western and Lochleys, is communities owning resources which give them some control on their local over their local area, but also bring them in resources so that those communities become financially sustainable into the long term.
So it's both agency and investment, which is great. Which again is back to your original point around you saw the role as being enabling those things to happen. Now I'm conscious of then the future. So we've looked a little bit about your history, we've looked a little bit about your role as cabinet lead, and there's a lot of innovation leadership there, and now you step into this new role at Elim. You do it in a fascinating time in human history, COVID-19, but we've also, even before that, we've got sort of a housing crisis, a construction skills crisis, and a climate crisis. So I'm just interested for you to think about your personal ambition. What is it that Paul Smith would like to achieve in the next 5 years when you think about that new role and what those priorities for you would look like?
Well, I mean, it's always difficult, and I think one of the things about having a board is to stop me being, going crazy with the many ideas. I think firstly, I think if you're a landlord and a social landlord, you need to devolve as much power as you can down to the front line and engage as much with customers to determine how that money is spent and actually improve the quality of their lives. And so it's very important for me that, right at the heart of the culture of the organisation is really, really high quality customer service, that our customers really like us. I mean, who likes their landlord? And that they feel that we're there when they need them, and probably we're not there when they don't need it. When they don't want us there, we're not sort of on their back. Elim also provides quite a lot of supported housing, and so there's an issue about how can we help ensure that the people who are with us, who have got some sort of support needs, or maybe have gone through some sort of crisis in their life, that we can help equip them to move on to something where they're feeling much more independent, much more secure, much more confident about their lives. Now, it won't always be us doing it.
Sure, you have
partners. It'll be about partners, and I've already started talking to some potential partners to help us with that journey. There's a little danger if an organisation thinks it can do everything. What we need to make sure is the things that we can do, we do well. But we bring in other really good organisations to give that breadth of service. So on the one level, there's really good service. And I think if you haven't got good service, you haven't really, as an organisation, got a right to exist. But the next stage then is that if you have got good service, then you either need to spread that either by promoting what's good about it to other organisations trying to do the same thing, through networking and partnership, or to grow it. And so what I guess I want to do is that I want to, Elim is a really strong organisation already, is to strengthen that customer engagement piece, that customer service piece, but also to look at how Elim itself can also develop as an organisation.
Well, it's great, isn't it? I mean, I think on the one hand, whilst you've left the cabinet, it's great for Bristol that you're staying in that housing with all that experience. And I just want to say thank you as the Housing Festival, because I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about is it's all about collaboration. You've talked about us as an enabler, and that's been possible because of your approach and your welcome and your willingness.
I talked about you being a tool, I think.
You did. I was trying to use a kinder word. Spanner, I think it was. But so thank you for that. And Paul, I know that I just want to personally put on record to say thank you for all your service to the city, because I think that whatever party politics you are in, whatever your ideologies, the truth is that entering into public service is not easy when you're there to be shot at. And I, for one, can certainly say thank you for the service you've given to Bristol Life. Also, I'm just delighted we get to continue to collaborate and work together. And I'm hoping, as well as the schemes that are already happening, it might be we can do something with Elim in the future.
And can I just say something about the Housing Festival? Some people have deliberately misconstrued what it is and what it's there for, but I mean, I think I said this when we launched it 2 years ago. I think we formally launched it.
2 years. Yeah.
At my age, the years just sort of
It
disappear.
feels like 15 years
mist,
ago, doesn't it? Let's be honest.
Is that when you first came to me with this idea? I know that you've been looking at a way of making a contribution to the city. And you said about a festival. I thought, oh God, not another housing conference, you know. You came with this concept and it fitted really well with what I wanted to do, and I'm sure what Marvin wants to do around housing innovation. And basically you offered to pick up some of that burden for us, and to do that within a badge, if you like. And I think the additional capacity that you've given and the team have given, sort of beyond what the council would have had the time or would have had the priority to do, I think has really added rather than an extra spanner to the toolkit, an extra string to the bow. And I think it's made a really appreciable and what will be a really measurable and obvious difference to what we've been able to achieve within the city. So I'd like to thank you personally for coming forward with that offer, and obviously the team that you've built around you.
Yeah. Well, Paul, it's been a real joy to work with you over the last few years, and I know that our working relationship and
I've not died yet.
You've not died yet, which is good news
yet.
for us. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time today, and we wish you every success with Elim, because actually what's exciting for the city, I think, is another way that you can contribute, and we'll see more great quality places and affordable housing in the city. So Paul, thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks, Jess.